Centre View texted in, said, Wanganui.
Yeah, there you go.
But I did a straw poll around the office at RNZ, and 90% said Hamilton.
Yeah, well, because they just haven't been to Wanganui for a very long time. So that you get everybody at the office to head down here and spend the weekend here, and they'll be blown away. And I know you would have voted Wanganui. You've been here, and you've seen how fabulous it is.
And check out the Wanganui computer and the elevator in the hill, eh? That's awesome.
Yeah, the elevator in the hill. Yep, absolutely. Oh no, there's
Powered by nuclear fission.
I may have been factually wrong on that. What powers the elevator in the hill? I forgot. It's amazing though, isn't it? What powers it?
What powers it? It's just electric. But
electricity.
Not fission or.
So why do you think why do you think, Hamish, for those of us who don't know about Wanganui, why was it chosen?
Well, look, we're topographically very beautiful, right by the river with the hills all around. But equally, the citizens for a very long time, for the last 25 years, have really shown a lot of civic pride, cared for the downtown, put a lot of effort into our heritage buildings and a lot of effort into things like recycling and anti-graffiti, and it looks pretty. If you're walking around, it's a very pretty place to be.
It's a very pretty place, and as I believe, I might be wrong, but you have the most built heritage of any city in Aotearoa, is that right?
Yeah, indeed, and with the corollary of having a lot of earthquake-prone buildings alongside it. But nevertheless, we've retained it. We didn't go through the big boom and bust cycle in the 70s and 80s. So whereas a lot of other cities knocked their beautiful heritage buildings down and built steel and glass, we've still got them.
We have one panellist here who doesn't look convinced about the
come on, it's
attributes
a
of one.
marketing exercise. This is about the city that can get their shit together the best, so it looks like a lovely place that you send it into the judge. Look, we're pretty.
And they did it, and they succeeded.
It's the best marketing city. Wanganui's got the most together town centre.
Than that. The judges come down and meet the locals and see the place, and that's what I'd encourage to the more any negative panellists to come down and visit Wanganui.
Yeah,
negative panellists.
I've been there. It's a lovely place. Check out the Wanganui computer. Check out the nuclear fission elevator.
Why are you so? What's with you on the Wanganui computer?
Are you on that computer?
No, I'll tell you why. Because no one in New Zealand knows about it, and there's fascinating parts of our history. I just found out about this the mental hospital down Dunedin, Seacliff. Have you heard of that?
I know it well.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
But the biggest thing for Wanganui, though, and it was when they got Michael Laws out of Wanganui, because he honestly, I'm not even doing a joke here, he gave the city such a bad stigma by always talking about all the negative things and attracting the negative things, and just a change of leadership and stuff there has been really good for a great town.
All right.
Yeah,
just the big question, I guess, there was, I know a couple who moved there and they got a wonderful Art Deco home in Wanganui. So it was livability, a house I can afford. Average house price, what is it in Wanganui?
Well, you can get a pretty good home for about $250,000.
250,000?
Yeah.
You made a mistake saying that on air.
You can get a mansion for $750,000. So, yeah. It's pretty good.
I got to go get in the car right now. I'm driving down. I'm coming down.
Three of us coming down.
Road trip.
Hamish, thank you very much for your time. That is Mayor of Wanganui, Hamish McDowell, on a place where you can get a $250,000 house. Guy Williams, Alexi Russell, thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you.
Emma Hurley, thank you very much for putting together the week. Appreciate it.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, voters say nope to dope, but it's an overwhelming yes to voluntary euthanasia. Why and what happens now? The Justice Minister joins us live. 10,000 companies that got the wage subsidy have been audited, but despite hundreds of investigations underway, no charges have been laid. So who's paying back the cash? Skyrocketing rents in the Porirua region mean it's the most expensive place to rent in the country. A policy change means all replacement fishing crews will now be tested for COVID. The future of aviation takes off as New Zealand's first electric plane lands in Christchurch. And romance scams, they can break the heart and the bank. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. The End of Life Choice Act looks set to become law. Today's preliminary referendum result shows 65% support for it. But the legalisation of recreational cannabis now seems unlikely. 53% voted against it. Here's political reporter Yvette McCullough.
The Act leader, David Seymour, who promoted the End-of-Life Choice Bill, says he's thrilled the country has taken a step towards being more compassionate and humane.
And it's done it against a vociferous misinformation campaign. Just really happy today. I was born in New Zealand.
However, Sinead Donnelly of the lobby group Doctors Say No fears it will hurt the most vulnerable.
People potentially are going to feel that they're suffering with inadequate access to palliative care and choose euthanasia.
The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, believes it is highly unlikely either result will be overturned by the nearly 500,000 special votes still to be counted. On cannabis, he says the electorate has clearly spoken and the government is not proposing further drug law reform. National MP Nick Smith says that's the right thing to do.
To then try and reframe the argument as decriminalisation would be to act in bad faith.
However, Green MP Chloe Swarbrick is holding out for the special votes before conceding defeat.
We need around 67% of those specials in order to put this at the post.
The final results will be released next Friday. From Parliament, Yvette McCullough.
A man who killed his 17-month-old stepson in Auckland in June has been jailed for nearly 6 years. Angry that the boy's mother was using him as a babysitter, Philip John Welsh threw Malcolm Bell against a sofa. Sentencing him today, Justice Fata said pre-sentence reports found Welsh had a deprived and abusive upbringing that led to poor coping strategies and a propensity for impulsivity. He allowed for this in sentencing but stopped short of not imposing a minimum non-parole period.
The violence in this case was brutal. Malcolm was thrown with such force that he suffered a very severe head injury. The harm caused to the victims is really incalculable and was aggravated by your denial of the offending and attribution of harm to Malcolm's mother.
Welsh will have to serve at least 5 years and 11 months of his sentence. This morning's school bus crash in Northland involved 2 other vehicles, a car and a truck. It happened at Brynderwen at the intersection of 2 state highways 1 and 12. At least 15 people, including Otamatea High School students, and 5 from the car were treated for moderate to minor injuries. Electronic signs alert motorists on State Highway 1 to slow from 100 to 60 an hour when a sensor detects a vehicle approaching the intersection. But one local, Peter Bailey, thinks the limit there should be permanently reduced.
They're doing 100 kilometres an hour both directions, and I think it would be good if they could put in a 80k speed limit just there. It might not stop the accidents, but it might save a bit more mess.
Peter Bailey says the accident has shocked the community. Northbound lanes of Auckland's southwestern motorway have been blocked by a truck fire. Thick black smoke and flames came from the truck and trailer unit near the Hillsborough off-ramp. Rush hour traffic has been affected and motorists are asked to avoid the area if possible. More than 10,000 tonnes of potentially toxic waste may finally be removed from Matota's disused paper mill by Christmas. The Environmental Defence Society launched court proceedings against New Zealand aluminium smelters and Rio Tinto, seeking a ruling on who has responsibility for the Uvea premix, a waste byproduct of aluminium production at Tiwai Point. The ongoing Environment Court action continued behind closed doors this morning. Alternate Judge Laurie Newhook issued a minute afterwards, saying the waste will be taken to an industrial site with the aim of completing that work by Christmas, depending on the weather. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Silver Ferns coaches are demanding an improved showing in tonight's second netball test against England, saying no players can take their places for granted. Despite a 13-goal win in the first of 3 tests in Hamilton, coach Nolene Taurua thought the Ferns took 2 steps back. And assistant coach Deb Fuller says all players need to prove themselves as the squad works towards major events.
The girls will know that the industry that we're in, you're competitive every moment of time. So if you're in the starting 7 doesn't mean you're going to stay there. If you're in the 12 doesn't mean you're going to stay there. That's just the nature of being high-performing sport.
Silver Ferns assistant coach Deb Fuller. All Blacks captain Sam Cane says there's no hiding from the facts as they endeavour to lock away the Bledisloe Cup in Sydney tomorrow night. The All Blacks have won just 3 of their past 6 tests across the Tasman, stretching back to 2015. Cane says it adds to the unique situation of trying to win the Bledisloe Cup in Australia.
Particularly in my time in the All Blacks, with the way the schedule's worked out, it's always been Test matches in Aussie first, followed by New Zealand. So when it comes to the Bledisloe and sort of the crunch games, they've been on New Zealand soil. So the shoe sort of on the other foot here this weekend.
All Blacks captain Sam Cane and the Wellington Phoenix have signed young Australian midfielder Joshua Laws on a 1-year contract ahead of the new A-League football season. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, clever comedian Bill Bailey's tips on happiness. Anju Moon is the director of a movie about the late Helen Reddy, called I Am Woman, of course. Emmy award-winning cinematographer New Zealander Baz Idoine, who's just worked on the Star Wars spin-off The Mandalorian. I'm Kim Hill. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Mostly cloudy, few showers, some heavy, possible thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening. Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Often cloudy with isolated showers mainly in the afternoons and evenings. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy, occasional rain tomorrow, more persistent in the afternoon and evening. Nelson and Marlborough, mostly cloudy with a few showers in Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds tonight. Rain for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy with patchy rain in Otago and Southland tonight. Scattered showers spreading north tomorrow, some heavy with possible thunderstorms in Canterbury. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls spreading north today and tomorrow, easing to showers from the south tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, rain late tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The results are in, well, nearly, for the 2 referendums on voluntary euthanasia and cannabis. Provisional results have been released and it's a big tick for the End of Life Choice Act, giving people with a terminal illness who meet the criteria the option of lawfully requesting help to die. 65% voted in support, with nearly 34% voting against. But New Zealanders have said no to legalising recreational cannabis. However, campaigners are still holding out hope the referendum could get over the line once special votes have been counted. The yes vote was 46%, with 53% voting no. Also revealed today, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern voted yes to both. Our political editor Jane Patterson filed this report.
The results are in. The End of Life Choice referendum has been won. 65.
The pro-voluntary euthanasia campaign erupting with delight after ACT MP Brooke van Velden revealed the outcome at Parliament. Party leader and sponsor of the End of Life Choice Act, David Seymour, says New Zealand has taken a step towards becoming more humane and compassionate.
And it's done it against a vociferous misinformation campaign. It's also done it in a way that shows New Zealanders are fair and reasonable people. So just really happy today. I was born in New Zealand and I'm a New Zealander.
However, doctors opposed say they're deeply concerned about the decision that will affect the country's most vulnerable. Dr Sinead Donnelly of the group Doctors Say No says specialist care of the dying is chronically underfunded and the new legislation will not help the plight of those most at risk.
In our view, that's a lethal combination. You know, people potentially are going to feel that they're suffering and are suffering with inadequate access to palliative care and choose euthanasia.
Hospice New Zealand Māori Advisory Group Chair Ria Earp says she's not surprised but is still disappointed.
I still don't believe that this act will serve Māori well, and I don't believe it will serve those who are dying very well either.
Based on polling leading up to election day, voluntary euthanasia was looking like a sure bet, but it was a lot closer for legalising cannabis, borne out by today's initial results. Green MP and high-profile campaigner Chloe Swarbrick says because of the record numbers of special votes, she remains optimistic.
We still have around 500,000 votes to come through for those specials. The kind of indications that I have heard from those who have been doing the calculations, crunching those numbers, is that we need around 67% of those specials to be skewed towards yes in order to put this at the post.
National's Nick Smith disagrees, describing it as a clear-cut result.
That would be incredibly unlikely to be turned over on the special votes. New Zealanders have voting against the legalisation of cannabis. That's good news for our country and ensuring it would be healthier, that it's safer, that we will be more successful.
Throughout the campaign, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern refused to say which way she voted so as not to influence others. Today, she revealed she voted yes in the cannabis referendum, prompting this dig from Chloe Swarbrick.
I'm in the Greens because I have the courage of my convictions.
The president of the New Zealand Union of Students Association, Isabella Lenahan-Aiken, says she's gutted Ms Ardern waited until it was too late, as her support could have got it over the line.
And it is really disappointing that although Jacinda believes herself in the decriminalisation and legalisation of cannabis, she was not brave enough and courageous enough to sell that to the nation.
Chris Fowley from Normal, which supports the reform of cannabis laws, says the message sent by New Zealanders is they support some change from the status quo.
Half the country supports it and half don't, but that doesn't mean, as a non-binding referendum, that the door's closed to everything.
National's Nick Smith says New Zealanders have voted against making cannabis more readily available, and any move towards that, including decriminalisation, would be a betrayal of that result.
To then try and reframe the argument as decriminalisation or something else would be to act in bad faith against a democratic decision that's been made.
Chloe Swarbrick says nothing short of legalisation deals with the issue of supply.
The issue of people graduating to using harsher substances. So what we were talking about here always was getting control of that supply chain and taking it out of the black market, putting the issue into the light so we can deal with it like adults.
The full and final results of both referenda and the election will be released next Friday. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And joining us now from our Parliament studio is Justice Minister Andrew Little. Good evening, Minister. Are you in any way surprised that considerably more New Zealanders seem comfortable ending a life, more comfortable with that than having a joint?
Oh, look, I think they're two completely separate issues, operating in two completely different realms. I mean, one is about those who meet the very strict conditions of the End of Life Choice Act, that would enable them to make a decision to bring their life to a close early, compared to what we're talking about, a substance that we know is capable of causing harm, that is already in reasonably widespread use, but facing a question about how or if we wanted to put more control on it. In the end, the electorate has made their respective decisions, and for whatever reason, we've got the results that we've got.
Why do you think it didn't get over the line?
The cannabis?
Yes.
Look, I know getting out campaigning and talking to people, it always felt to me as if it was 50-50, and the polls were sort of were pretty varied in terms of their results. I think some people thought that what they were voting on was whether or not we would have cannabis in our communities, as opposed to whether we would control it. Others were concerned whether the provisions of the draft legislation were enough to control the harms that cannabis can bring. But in the end, there just wasn't enough support for it.
So you supported it, and we know today the Prime Minister supported it too. So if you believed in it and thought this was the right thing, why weren't you braver? Why didn't you go out there collectively and campaign on it, rather than, the critics would say, sit silently and let this happen?
Well, I don't think you could characterise what we did as sitting silently. In the end, my job as Minister of Justice flowed out of the confidence and supply agreement with the Greens in 2017, which was to hold a referendum on whether or not we should legalise cannabis. I did that. It was a pretty extensive exercise. We put together a draft piece of legislation that called on input from all sorts of experts. We had a cross-party parliamentary working group looking at it, all parties then in Parliament. Had a go at it. We put together a piece of legislation that I think dealt with the issues and the concerns that people had, but allowed for control of a substance that we know can cause harm. and it was pretty clear. In the end, it was for
But you
the
didn't really
electorate to
push
decide.
it, did you, Minister? You didn't push it as a campaign thing. You didn't say, OK, Labor wants this change to happen. It's part of our campaign and this is what we want to do. Chloe Swarbrick led the charge, and some people would say maybe she was preaching to the converted, and there possibly would have been benefit in someone appealing to a broader base. Why didn't you take that role, or why didn't Jacinda Ardern take that role?
Look, I didn't conceal my preference and the way I was voting, and working on the legislation as I did, leading that project, gave me good information and clear insights. And my critical role was to make sure that there was draft legislation, that the question was framed in a way that meant we could get good information out, that it was simple to understand. We had good collateral information that was available and out there. The indicators from the website traffic indicate that a lot of people got access to that. Way more people went to the cannabis information as opposed to the end-of-life choice information. But in the end, people made their decision, and the polls showed that this was always going to be a roughly 50-50 call, and that's actually what happened, although clearly on the less than 50 on the yes side than on the no side. So there we go.
As you point out, it's pretty tight, roughly 50-50, a little bit to the nose. So you have a significant majority, right? And with that, a mandate. Will you move to make any other changes around drug laws?
Yeah, look, we've got a mandate to govern, but there was this quite discreet exercise around the drug law reform question.
That's legalisation. So in terms of drug law reform, will you move to do anything more?
We have no other plans. We've made some changes to the Misuse of Drugs Act that tilt towards a decriminalisation environment. That is by changing, the way police approach their prosecutorial discretion. But we have no other plans, Minister, on drug law reform.
Is that enough? Well, those changes you made, which have a wider discretion. I mean, how often? Can you give us a percentage for how often that discretion is exercised and people are referred to health facilities rather than a court process?
Well, the information I've had, the most recent information I've had, is that since the law changed, roughly 500 people have had a health referral. Now, I don't know what proportion of that is. Yeah, so I don't know what the proportion of that relates to. Look, there's no question. We're very serious about that particular law change working. We will have to review it fairly soon and see whether it is achieving what we wanted it to achieve. But to go to the bigger question, is there a mandate for broader drug law reform? Well, this referendum result will tell you not. The issue about decriminalisation...
Not for legalising, but it's not a vote on any other changes, is it?
Well, the question then is, so do you do decriminalisation? And I say, actually, to the extent people understand the difference between the two, actually, there is not a mandate for material drug law reform. Personally, on the issue of decriminalisation, I don't agree with that. It is a halfway step that creates more problems than it solves. You look at the experience of the Netherlands, ever since they introduced the coffee shop regime. Actually, their biggest problem, and I spoke to the Netherlands Chief of Police, is they've had to turn a blind eye to the criminal elements supplying the coffee shops where people can use legally. It just creates a huge, complex mess that we wouldn't want to replicate. Really the choice is, do we want to control the substance in our communities, or do we want to hope that what we've got at the moment is working okay? The electorate has decided on the latter. That's what we have to stick with.
The Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor and a panel of experts produced research and commentary on the cannabis referendum. And you're probably really familiar with this, but for our listeners, it stated racial biases mean that the discretion afforded to police may privilege non-Māori and disadvantage Māori. Māori are almost twice as likely as non-Māori to go to court over a first offence, nearly 7 times more likely to be charged. Though police discretion to take health-orientated approach rather than prosecuting those using cannabis, inherent bias in police discretion implied by disproportionate arrests and convictions for cannabis possession for Māori suggests that this law change doesn't address the social inequities as much as legalising cannabis could. Do you believe in that? Do you believe what's stated there?
Yeah, that's come from experts, and we know, and
Right.
even the police hierarchy would admit there are
Okay.
issues about bias in the way they police,
Given
not
you
just
accept
drug
that-
offences, but other offences too.
Sorry to interrupt, Minister, but given you accept that, if you know that's true, that discretion doesn't work because there is inherent bias and Māori are still getting the raw deal here, and given you have a mandate and the power to change something that is inherently racist, are you not part of the problem if you don't change it?
We had an agreement over the time of the last government and the confidence and supply agreement in 2017 to put together a referendum on the question of legalising cannabis. We've done that. And all those issues were debated. All those issues were out to the voting public on the pros and cons of legalising or not. And the voters have voted. I may not like the result. Others may not like the result. That is the result. And in our democracy, and we said beforehand we would be bound by the result. We would honour the result. We have to honour that result. Are there other things we can do to address prosecutorial and policing bias? Of course there is, and we will continue to do that. We've exposed that in the last 3 years in government through the criminal justice system. Of course we've got more work to do on that, and we will. But on the question of legalising cannabis, the electorate has spoken, and we have said we would honour that result, and we have to honour that result.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is the Justice Minister, Andrew Little, there. Now, Kylie Quince is an Associate Professor of Law and Deputy Chair of the New Zealand Drug Foundation, and she was also on the Chief Science Advisor's Expert Advisory Panel on cannabis, and she's been listening to the Justice Minister and joins me now. First off, let's start with the result. Kylie, how can 53% of voters, the majority, be wrong on this issue?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, we've got to remember that although we're talking about the overall number, that number is made up of a number of different demographics. So I think it'll be interesting to see the breakdown by ethnicity, gender, age, and of course once the specials come through, how the inmate vote went. So, obviously majority rules, but within that majority there would be some significant differences. Would be my punt.
Nick Smith, National Party MP, says that this result is a victory for common sense. How would you characterise it?
Well, as I've just said, I think it's a victory for the majority. I wouldn't characterise it as one of common sense, but I completely agree with the Minister where he says that the electorate spoke. They had all the information available to them. They may have been a little bit gun-shy in respect of a couple of particular issues. The bill was trying to do a number of different things, legalisation and control, and I think people were a bit spooked about the legalised market aspect, and also particularly the concerns in relation to young people. So I think there were a couple of different issues within this quite broad agenda that the Cannabis Legalisation Control Bill touched upon, and some things were not supported by that 53% majority.
The Prime Minister has today released information that she voted yes to legalising cannabis, but she didn't say so ahead of time, and same is the case with other high-profile ministers, although the Justice Minister was clear about which way his vote was going. Should those other people have been more vocal?
I think it was a little bit disappointing that the Prime Minister didn't come out in support. We certainly pushed her to make her views known. I think realistically, I don't know that anyone who knows, the Prime Minister as a politician, as a person, I think we could be pretty sure which way she was going to vote. But I do think a public declaration would at least have persuaded some of those persuadables. So, and that's because she's known. Her branding is really as an empathetic and person who is keen on showing compassion. And if it's not really the fact of the way that she was voting, but the reasons why. If she'd articulated those, I think that could have had some impact.
The Justice Minister seems pretty clear that there's nothing more he can do here. Do you think there is anything else that can be done right now?
No, I'm not sure that he did say there's nothing more he could do. He did say that specifically on the issue of legalisation, but in respect of some of the issues that can be tackled without, that can be disentangled from the legalisation question, I think both he and the Prime Minister this week have been quite clear on that in terms of racist policing, in terms of public health funding and campaigns, education in respect of, young people being disconnected from school and the impact that has on their life pathways, funding of health and addiction services. none of those things are necessarily tied to the legalisation agenda. So, and they've both made positive noises in the last few days about advancing those agendas, irrespective of the final outcome, wash-up of the referendum per se.
Do you agree that the changes that have been made to the Misuse of Drugs Act effectively amount to decriminalisation?
Yes, I do. I mean, so the fundamental definition or distinction between legalisation and decriminalisation is that the substance remains unlawful. The legal system's response to low-level possession and use of the substance does not attract criminal penalties. That's exactly what Section 7, the amendment to Section 7 of the Misuse of Drugs Act in 2019 did. So it is de facto decriminalisation. Am I content with that? No, I completely agree with Minister Little on that point. It means that every person, irrespective of whether or not the criminal justice system has a formal response to possession and use, every person outside of the medicinal cannabis regime is sourcing that cannabis from an illegal source. That's a problem.
Do you believe that discretion is being exercised equally?
We know for a fact from the data in the first 10 months that the Official Information Act data sourced by the media in that first few months of operation has shown that the police practice has changed very little. That may be partly due to the fact that the police don't have sufficient education or guidance as to how to use the new discretion appropriately, and that's a problem. So that's something that needs to be looked into. I mean, I would like to be optimistic to think that police practice can change, but I also think that there's a point to be made there, which is the fact that the overwhelming majority of cannabis users do not require a health response. They don't suffer adverse health reactions to the use of cannabis. So it's a little bit of a sap, I think, to people who are concerned by a sort of reefer madness kind of reaction to cannabis per se, when frankly most people don't need that.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Kylie Quince, who is an Associate Professor of Law and the Deputy Chair of the New Zealand Drug Foundation. It is almost 27 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, I know you're going to have some opinions on this, so let us know what they are. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Have these decisions come out the way you wanted them to? Let us know your thoughts, and in particular with cannabis, does anything else need to happen now? More than 10,000 companies have been audited to check they've met the rules of the wage subsidy program. More than $14 billion has been paid in wage subsidies, with some of the larger recipients since reporting profits and paying dividends. That's raised questions about the eligibility requirements. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The wage subsidy scheme is fast drying up. Latest figures show nearly 24,000 jobs are being subsidised, down from 52,000 a week before and 1.7 million since March. But the scheme's bill will be felt for some time yet, and work is underway to drill into where the $14 billion worth of payments went. The Ministry for Social Development has completed 10,000 random and targeted audits of the nearly 760,000 businesses which received the money. 844 cases have been referred for investigation, with 335 underway. Victoria University tax professor Lisa Marriott says that's relatively low.
I think that does need to be much higher, particularly because there are around about 8% of those cases that are then being referred onwards for some level of investigation.
She says there's grounds to look for more.
The fact that they have got 844 cases being investigated tends to suggest that there are at least some businesses out there that have perhaps are struggling to establish that they have followed the rules as they should have done.
Plenty of people are giving the money back. More than 16,000 payments have been received, with MSD requesting a total of nearly 19,000. Most of those have been initiated by businesses. Some of the top recipients, including Mainfreight's Don Braid, says the decision to return their $10.6 million was a moral one, despite being eligible to receive the money.
That could well be right from a monetary point of view, but we would be poorer morally for doing it. And it just did not sit with how we act and behave as a business. Our integrity is everything, and morally it didn't sit right with us, even though we qualified to receive it.
The largest payback to date has been Silver Fern Farms, who returned the nearly $40 million they initially took. While Air New Zealand is the largest recipient of the scheme, receiving $113 million, it has also paid back $3.3 million it was not able to allocate under the wage subsidy rules. It's something CEO Greg Foran didn't know about when Checkpoint asked last night.
I noticed that you've paid more than $3 million back in wage subsidies. Why was that?
I'm not sure of the answer to that one. I'm sorry, Lisa.
Nobody's told you about that?
I was not aware of that.
So does that surprise you that you don't know that?
There are many things that I'm getting across at the moment, Lisa, but $3 million paid back in wage subsidies I'm not aware of the details on that one, I'm sorry.
Today, the airline clarified why it's repaid the money despite being on its knees financially. It says there was money left over from employees who left the business before the end of the 12-week period, employees who went on ACC or personal leave during the 12-week period, or employees initially thought to be eligible to receive the wage subsidy but were subsequently found not to be. Other top repayments include engineering consultant firm Becker. Managing Director Daryl Wendelbourne says they gave back their $15 million.
I think moral is always in there. We are a values-based and employee-owned organisation.
Doug Johnson is the Managing Director of the Tonkin and Taylor Group, which returned more than $5 million.
We went into the process. We didn't know whether we needed it or not. Our forecast had said that we would, but we did enter into the application on the basis, and we did confirm with MSD when we applied for it that if we didn't need it, we could pay it back. And that's what we did.
Jill Nort Wong is a Professor of Accounting at Auckland University. He's criticised companies which received the subsidy and went on to pay a dividend.
If companies were able to pay dividends, obviously they were in a cash position to do that, then they really didn't need to draw on the wage subsidy.
And he says if the subsidies were to be needed again, things would need to be different.
If we were to do it again, I would like to see it possibly as a forgivable loan, that the government would give it to you and they would forgive it if you actually met the appropriate criteria over, say, the 12-month period or for the year-end or whatever it is.
As the scheme's autopsy continues, Lisa Marriott hopes the same rigour will be applied to the companies as is given to benefit fraud.
We're fairly keen to pursue investigations and prosecutions of those who engage in welfare fraud. You would hope that a similar sort of business fraud would not have an approach taken to it which was significantly lighter.
In a statement, the Ministry for Social Development says it has 100 fraud intervention staff working in its audit team. Extra checks during audits include confirming with Inland Revenue the number of employees and reiterating the obligations contained in the employer declaration to ensure they are understood. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
At least 15 people, including school students, have been injured in a multi-vehicle crash in Northland during the morning commute. Passers-by stopped to help the injured, many of them students from Otamatia High in Mangatoroto. 5 have been taken to Whangarei Hospital with moderate injuries. Chen Liu reports.
The damaged front of a school bus involved in a 3-vehicle smash. The windscreen and right front bumper smashed. Students who were on their way to school were among those injured. Emergency services were called to State Highway 12 near the intersection with State Highway 1 in Brindlewing at 8:20 this morning. Police say the crash also involved the truck and a car, and the hospital told RNZ a mother and her 4 children who were in the car were treated for minor injuries and discharged. The damaged school bus was towed away just before midday. Rion Chapman is one of the tow truck workers.
Looks like it's only just damaged the crash bar for where the bumper would be. So, window. They'll probably write it off.
Mr. Chapman says it would have been frightening for those involved.
Anyone on the bus would have survived, so just would have been a bit scary.
A St. John spokesperson says staff members assessed 7 patients on the scene. 5 of them have been taken to Whangarei Hospital in a moderate condition, and 2 with minor injuries didn't require hospitalisation. 10 patients were treated for minor injuries at Otamatia High School. They were among the 18 people taken to the school by locals who stepped in to help. Radoslav Antonovich, a local who lives close to the crash scene, says it's not a particularly dangerous intersection and accidents don't happen there often. Electronic speed signs alert motorists travelling on State Highway 1 to slow from 100 to 60 kilometers per hour when a sensor detects an approaching vehicle. But another local, Peter Bailey, thinks the speed limit at the intersection should be permanently reduced.
They're doing 100 kilometres an hour both directions. And I think it would be good if they could put in a 80k speed limit just there. It might not stop the accidents, but it might save a bit more mess.
He says the accident has shocked locals.
Just a shock to the community, I guess, to have something like that. But I guess it's a bit of might be a wake-up call for us to look at improving the traffic control at that intersection.
The school's website says the majority of its students travel on buses from Mangawhai in the east to Pahi in the west. The Kaipara District Mayor Jason Smith says the school bus had picked up students from the Kaiwaka and the Mangawhai districts.
We're just extremely concerned for these patients and the students of Odumatea High School and the drivers and passengers of the other vehicles as well, that everyone is well and safe and everyone gets home at the end of the day. That's the most important thing.
Mr. Smith says the intersection near the Brindlewangs is challenging, with vehicles travelling at high speeds.
The Brindlewan junction has been redesigned in recent years regarding safe turning bays. We're just hopeful for a very good outcome for all the patients.
The school declined RNZ's request for an interview, but provided this statement.
Odumatea High School and Health Services are supporting those students involved in this morning's accident involving a school bus. The school remains open for instruction as normal, and we will continue to offer support to all the students and their families at this time.
Police say the investigation into the crash is continuing. Mō te hotaka o te ahi nei ko Chen Liu tēnei.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, jail time for a man whose stepson died after he threw him against a sofa. Who's to blame for the spectator-friendly America's Cup course cancellation? And the government announces COVID testing for ship changeover crews. But ports don't think it's good enough. Love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program this evening, but particularly about the outcomes of the vote on cannabis and voluntary euthanasia. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or Facebook us at Checkpoint RNZ. Time now, though, for the headlines with Susanna.
The End of Life Choice Act is set to become law after today's preliminary referendum result showed 65% voted in favour. But the legalisation and control of cannabis now seems unlikely, with 53% voting against. Justice Minister Andrew Little says neither result is likely to change after special votes are counted, and the government is not proposing further drug law reform. Locals near Brindlewan and Northland, where a school bus collided with a truck and a car, want the speed limit permanently reduced to at an intersection. At least 15 people, including Odumatea High School students and 5 from the car, were treated for moderate to minor injuries. Electronic signs alert drivers to slow to 60 kilometres an hour when a sensor detects a vehicle approaching the intersection. A man who killed his 17-month-old stepson in Auckland in June has been jailed for nearly 6 years. Sentencing Philip John Welsh today, Justice Fata said pre-sentence reports found Welsh had a deprived and abusive upbringing. He allowed for this in sentencing, but stopped short of not imposing a minimum non-parole period. Ports of Auckland says the government is not learning from mistakes at the border that brought COVID-19 into the community. Spokesperson Matt Ball says isolation is needed, as evidenced by the case of the engineer who caught the virus after working on a ship which had new crew from overseas. The government today said all crew coming into the country will be tested for the virus, but Ports of Auckland requires all transferring crew to complete 14 days isolation. More than 10,000 tonnes of potentially toxic waste may finally be removed from Mataura's disused paper mill by Christmas. The Environmental Defence Society launched court proceedings against New Zealand aluminium smelters and Rio Tinto to assign responsibility for the Uvea waste. A minute from Judge Laurie Newhook, following a closed Environment Court hearing this morning, said the waste could be taken to an industrial site by Christmas depending on the weather. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, house prices. Gosh, is there ever a time we're not talking about these? But apparently they're dragging consumer confidence up.
Yeah, but unfortunately not everyone is happy about it. So ANZ's latest consumer confidence survey, that's in. It shows headline sentiment is up for about 9 points on the month, bringing the index to about 109, but it's still well below its historical average. There are a lot of bright spots in the survey though. A net 28% of people expected to be better off financially next year. That was a 6-point improvement on last month. And 11% of respondents thought now was a good time to purchase a major household item. That was a marked improvement on the month before. ANZ's chief economist Sharon Zollner says, as a rule of thumb, booming house prices do tend to lift confidence, but at the moment, that's not everything like this is black and white. With younger people who tend to be pretty upbeat when it comes to consumer confidence, their confidence at the moment is actually lower than it was a year ago, whereas older people who are probably enjoying seeing the value of their most valuable assets, their houses, go up and up, well, they're probably rubbing their hands at the sign of this, and they're probably the ones who are actually lifting up this indicator, this metric at the moment. So look, all in all, this survey is a positive sign, especially for businesses, that more and more people do have an appetite to go out there and pull the trigger on a major household item. But look, there are tough roads ahead, especially with international tourism. We're already going to feel the loss of that this summer, and that's going to begin to bite.
Okay. What about this looming skills shortage and what effect it will have on the tech sector when it's kind of poised for growth?
Yeah, look, this was a really interesting report to come out from the Westpac Bank, and they talked about how, unsurprisingly, the demand for software, for technology, things like cloud computing, that really accelerated it when COVID-19 began to emerge. More and more businesses looking to offset the risks of the pandemic, move their businesses online. It also predicted that the appetite for such products, that's going to balloon over the longer term, and it also said that many New Zealand firms, they're poised to grab a slice of the global software tech sector, which brings in $5 trillion of revenue every single year. However, and this is where the trouble comes in, Westpac's industry economist Paul Clark, he says local firms may struggle to actually scale up and meet this demand and take advantage of these opportunities because our universities aren't producing enough highly skilled graduates for the sector. And what's really interesting about this is that unlike other sectors at the moment who are complaining about skills shortages, a lot of them, they're pointing to the border saying that we can't bring these people into the country. Well, this sector, they're saying that we actually are generating the talent. The problem is we're not generating enough of it. So the consequence of this, well, competition likely is going to ramp up for talent, which will drive up wages, and it's likely going to lead to more acquisitions and mergers in the sector as more medium to large firms look to acquire the talent and the resources of smaller firms. So look, if you're looking to upskill at the moment, this is the industry for you.
Maybe not for me, though. I don't know if I have bandwidth for that. What about the Friday on the markets? What did it yield?
Another day in the red for the NZX. It closed down nearly 1% or 117 points to 12,084. Our dollar, it's buying 66.3 US cents, 94 Australian and 51.3 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with business there. A man who threw his stepson against a sofa, causing injuries that later killed him, has been jailed for nearly 6 years. Philip John Welsh assaulted 17-month-old Malcolm Bell in Auckland last June, angered by the boy's mother using him as a babysitter. Today, the boy's family described watching him die of his injuries during his week in Starship Hospital. Our court reporter, Annika Smith, was there and filed this story. And a warning, the details in this report may distress some listeners.
Malcolm Bell's mother, Savannah, stood in the High Court at Auckland this morning and told the court her baby's death haunts her at night.
All I see is visions of what you've done throwing my son the way you did. Seeing my son pass away is all part of a nightmare. You said you loved him like he was your own, and I trusted you. You're a liar, a coward, a monster.
Malcolm Bell died in hospital after his stepfather, Philip Welsh, threw him against a sofa, angry he felt Ms. Bell was using him as a babysitter. The boy was rushed to Starship Hospital, his brain bleeding and swelling, but died a week later. Malcolm's maternal grandmother, Sophie Porkai, said her life had been filled with stress, heartache and despair ever since.
To have to sit at Malcolm's bedside and not be able to comfort him or take away his mamai was one of the saddest weeks in my life. To sit there and watch my grandson pass was one of the worst days of my life.
Welsh began crying in the dock as Ms Porkai spoke, dabbing his eyes with tissue paper. Ms Porkai said she could not forgive him.
Children and grandchildren are meant to bury their parents and their grandparents, not the other way around. The accused has broken the circle of my whānau. He has taken one of my tongas away from me, and Malcolm can never be replaced. For him, this I can never forgive him for.
Welsh denied any wrongdoing right up until the eve of his trial last month when he admitted a manslaughter charge, even pointing the finger at Malcolm's mother over her son's death. Ms Bell swore at him as she left the courtroom after the sentencing today. Malcolm's paternal father, Tom Richardson, said he didn't know why Welsh had killed his son.
I can't understand why you did it when there were so many other options. You could have walked away, could have closed the door, done anything, but no, you did what you did.
Justice Futter said pre-sentence reports showed Welsh had a deprived upbringing, marked by physical abuse and homelessness that led to poor coping strategies and a propensity for impulsivity. He gave him a 20% discount for this and a further 10% for his late guilty plea. But the judge stopped short of not imposing a minimum non-parole period.
The violence in this case was brutal. Malcolm was thrown with such force that he suffered a very severe head injury. The harm caused to the victims is really incalculable and was aggravated by your denial of the offending and attribution of harm to Malcolm's mother.
Justice Futter jailed Welsh for 5 years and 11 months. The 53-year-old must serve at least half of his sentence before being eligible for parole. Sophie Porkai says her grandson will never be forgotten.
My other grandchildren are always asking, Nana, where's Malcolm? Tears well up in my eyes as I turn to them and say, he is having a long sleep and he is playing with the angels. My grandson deserved better than what happened to him, but I know he is now at peace. Malcolm will never be forgotten and he will live on and on forever in our hearts.
From the High Court at Auckland, this is Annika Smith.
The blame game over the staging of the America's Cup in Auckland early next year has stepped up another notch. The debate is over a decision to scrap the two courses which offer views of the racing from the shoreline. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says the teams need to sort it out to give Aucklanders bang for their buck. But now the Italian syndicate Luna Rossa says it's the mayor who needs to make it happen. Nick Trubridge reports.
The finger-pointing is flying, a spat over who is to blame for the fact that, as it stands, Aucklanders won't be able to see the America's Cup racing from the shore. Italian syndicate Luna Rossa, which is the challenger of record, successfully had the vantage-friendly courses B and C removed from the regatta. That's because the Harbour Master and Ports of Auckland couldn't spare that area for the Challenger Series. That's the precursor event.
Well, the water space is important. It's like a pitch, you know.
That's Brad Butterworth on the AM show this morning. The former Team New Zealand skipper is now tactician for Luna Rossa. He says it's unfair if Team New Zealand can practice on the two inshore courses while the other teams are fighting out the Challenger Series further out at sea. He wants it to be all or nothing and says if Ports of Auckland and the Harbour Master allow it, both regattas can happen on courses B and C. Butterworth is challenging the Mayor Phil Goff to make it happen.
Well, he runs the city, doesn't he?
What a night.
He can talk to the Harbour Master and he can talk to the Ports of Auckland. And I think he owns the Ports of Auckland.
While the council owns 100% of Ports of Auckland, it's not a council-controlled organisation. According to Phil Goff, that means it has a high degree of independence.
I can't direct them, but I can ask questions of them. They say that would cause significant disruption and significant costs in terms of blocking shipping that would normally be using those channels at that time. They say that an agreement was reached in February, which they then came to the party by making compromises and meeting some of those costs. But I think their view is that they expect the other two parties to that agreement to uphold their end of the bargain.
Phil Goff has picked up the ball, Butterworth says, is in his court and plonked it back at the feet of the teams.
And they need to find a way in which the courses that are available on the basis that there is a level playing field. That is in their court to resolve. The port has already made a compromise of ensuring that the shipping is delayed for the races that were agreed to by all the parties back in February.
The Mayor's certain the teams can come to an agreement so Aucklanders get a good look at the racing.
If the teams that are contesting for the Challengers Cup, the Prada Cup, can't use the courses while they are in that competition, then it would be a level playing field if Team New Zealand wasn't used to use the courses at that point in time. My understanding is that they have suggested that to the challengers.
In a statement, Team New Zealand says it's done just that. On Tuesday, it offered the inshore courses a wide berth, a promise not to sail or train on any days when the challengers can't. It says it wants a swift resolution. Auckland Council is pumping $113 million of ratepayers' money into hosting the America's Cup. That includes $71 million for building the team bases and upgrading parking spots for super yachts.
Taxpayer dollar, ratepayer dollar, and we expect them, actually, as adults, to come together to resolve the dispute that exists between them so that Auckland spectators are not disadvantaged.
The saga rolls on as the clock ticks down. Racing is due to start in mid-January. For Checkpoint, Nick Trowbridge.
It's 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. A lot of you getting in touch about the 2 referendum results today, and we'll get to your feedback shortly. New Zealand's first electric plane will be taken to the skies following its launch in Christchurch today. The battery electric 2-seat light sport aircraft is being marketed to people wanting to experience electric flight and learn to fly in a more sustainable way. Alicia Foon went to check it out.
I now declare Pipistrel Electric Air officially launched in Christchurch.
The future of aviation ready to take off. Mayor Leanne Dalzell plugging in the electric aircraft, symbolically cutting the ribbon alongside founder of Christchurch startup Electric Air, Gary Friedman, the genius who gave the idea wings.
I remember exactly when I got the idea. It was 4 years ago, it was in 2016, and I was driving an electric car. And I've always worked in renewable energy and and green transport, but I was flying petrol planes, and I remember driving to the airfield in my electric car, feeling good about that, getting out and then feeling quite guilty that I was going to jump into a petrol plane. I thought, well, how hard can it be? Someone must be doing this, and I discovered Pipistrel in Slovenia, who were just about to bring this plane out. So headed to Slovenia and flew this plane, and I was absolutely hooked. It was smooth, it was quiet. It was clean, it performed very, very well. And I just realised then that no one else was doing it, so then we were going to have to do it ourselves.
The plane is a little longer than a ute, and its wings are double the length. Designed as a training aircraft, it will be available for people wanting to experience electric flight and learn to fly in a more sustainable way.
We do have that choice now. There is an electric battery electric plane now, and for operators in New Zealand they can choose to go this route, and for people who are looking to learn to fly they can now do that in a zero emission way.
Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell says the region has been leading the way in cutting carbon emissions and going green, and hopes the electric aircraft will inspire the rest of the country to follow suit.
Well, I think it's really exciting. Christchurch has really tried to establish itself as an innovation hub, a place where people can trial new things, new technologies, and of course with sustainability, a key feature of what we're trying to achieve here. This ticks all of the boxes.
Glenn Martin was the lucky instructor chosen to first fly the plane in Aotearoa.
The great lie that pilots tell
people at parties usually is that flying's difficult and therefore we're all marvellous. The truth is flying's actually not that hard. If you can drive a car, you've probably got the skills to fly an aeroplane. So, and the electric plane in some ways makes it even a little bit easier. There's a little bit less management of the engine going on. So I think, anybody can come out and fly.
This is the very definition of guilt-free flying. 1 hour in the air, 30 minutes reserved, and then all you have to do is recharge it. The plane is approximately 70% quieter than its fossil fuel equivalents and has a similar engine to an electric car. Demonstration flights in Christchurch begin from next week. And although you can't fly solo until 16 in New Zealand, Gary Friedman says people up to age 92 are lining up to give it a go.
There's no oil, there's no petrol, there's no spark plugs, there's no exhaust, so there's a lot less to go wrong with an electric aircraft. It's a simpler, more reliable technology, and it's obviously the way we're going to go. I suppose my message is let's electrify.
New Zealand has one of the highest rates of short-haul flights per person of any country in the world. As the country keeps climate change front of mind, Gary Friedman reckons there's only one way forward, and that's up in an electric plane. For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Foon, TNA.
Dominance will continue or history will be made in rugby's Farah Palmer Cup final tomorrow. Canterbury and Waikato meet in Christchurch to decide the winner of this year's National Provincial Women's Championship. Victory for Canterbury would mean a fourth straight title, while the visitors are chasing their maiden crown. Clay Wilson has more.
And that'll be enough to see Waikato through to the Farah Palmer Cup final.
Last weekend's semi-final win over Manawatu took the Waikato women within one win of history. Upset Canterbury in tomorrow's title decider, and they'll be crowned national champions for the first time. Waikato loose forward Kennedy Simon says the visitors are embracing their big chance.
Our theme is legacy, and we stripped the road back and talked to Regina Sheck, who gave us a bit of insight about the history of the team. And this weekend's going to be not only a testament to us, but to what those women, the pathway they paved for us to get to this moment.
Waikato were also one win from the title in 2014, when their one and only final appearance ended in defeat to Auckland. Simon says the team is openly talking about making history, but concedes beating Canterbury on their home patch is no easy feat.
We always walk towards challenges, and so, there's no denying that they're the best of the best at the moment, and we're coming to give them a good performance, but we know they're going to bring it back. They're going to defend their title with lots of pride, and I think that's a challenge that we're ready to take.
Having lifted the trophy the past 3 years running, Canterbury Vice-Captain Grace Brooker says they're well aware Waikato comes south with plenty of motivation.
We know there's a big target on our back, but we don't see ourselves up there. Every year it's not about protecting the trophy, it's about earning it back, so that's what we're mainly focusing on.
Helping them do that is a coaching and management team which includes a heavy female presence. Brooker says it's a factor which has had a big impact on their continued success.
We know it's more than just a game, we're trying to grow it for future generations and trying to get as many females involved as possible, so it's been a real key part of our environment and our culture, but the lads as well, the coaches, they've been doing an awesome job and keeping us all together and keeping us motivated.
Motivation for many players has also been supplemented by further chances to impress ahead of next year's World Cup on Kiwi soil. The Farah Palmer Cup is followed by a possibles versus probables clash next weekend, before a Blackfern side is selected for 2 matches against a New Zealand Barbarians team. Blackfern's coach Glenn Moore says he and the selection panel would definitely be keeping a close eye on tomorrow's final.
The one thing we are seeing is in the last few weeks we're seeing a number of these combinations of these players improving, and it's just going to be interesting to see how they go, the two best teams in the competition going against each other. So just how some of those players adapt to a little bit more pressure will be interesting for us.
And having been part of a more competitive North Pool, Waikato's Kennedy Simon hopes they'll be more resilient than Canterbury, who dominated the weaker South Pool.
Going into this weekend, that'll help us a lot. Physically, we were tested, mentally, and like you say, arguably our comp was a little bit harder.
Tomorrow afternoon's Farah Palmer Cup final in Christchurch kicks off at 2:05. Moti Hotaka o te ahi po nei, Ko Clay Wilson aho.
Right, let's get to some of your feedback now on the referendum. A lot of you getting in touch about cannabis and the vote in terms of legalisation, which was the majority was for no. Not so many about euthanasia, so do get in touch about that. Let us know what you think. Text us on 2101. But on cannabis, Susan says, I'm a non-cannabis user and voted yes for new legalisation. I think Labour wouldn't or couldn't campaign on this issue because Middle New Zealand is still stuck in the war on drugs rhetoric. Tessa has got in touch to say, with all due respect to Andrew Little, the reason people voted no is because they were ill or misinformed, says Tessa. They lost an opportunity to campaign effectively for the right thing, which is the right thing to do. And another Susan's got in touch to say, what a shame about the referendum not passing. It seems to me that those who voted against cannabis seem to think that this means cannabis will go away. It won't. Prohibition didn't work with alcohol and it doesn't work with cannabis, she says. I'm 73 and would rather have a smoke than a drink. I'm very annoyed. And Dave says, what a gobsmackingly stupid outcome on cannabis. We've spent most of this year listening to science and doing our best to make rational decisions, yet as a society have rejected a pragmatic, health-led response to cannabis. Shaking my head, says Dave. But Bob says they couldn't control legal highs and it would be the same with weed, and that's why I voted no. Jill agrees. The referendum went the way I voted, she says.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The head of the country's student union movement says the Prime Minister's failure to say until now how she voted in the cannabis referendum was politically expedient and lacked courage. Jacinda Ardern confirmed this afternoon she had voted yes to the legalisation of recreational cannabis, which preliminary results show does not have the numbers to pass. A majority of 53% of voters opposed it. The president of the Union of Students Associations, Isabella Lenahan-Aiken, says Ms Ardern's support could have got it over the line.
And it is really disappointing that although Jacinda believes herself in the decriminalisation and legalisation of cannabis, she was not brave enough and courageous enough to sell that to the nation.
Isabella Lenahan-Aiken. The Justice Minister says the electorate has spoken and the government has no other proposals for drug law reform this term. Andrew Little says it is highly unlikely the cannabis referendum result will be overturned by the nearly 500,000 special votes still to be counted. He says voters have made a clear-cut decision and the government will respect that.
We've been through this referendum process. I think given the verdict of the electorate, I think it would be irresponsible to say, by the way, in spite of your decision, we're going to proceed with further drug law reform. We have no other plans for drug law reform.
Andrew Little says he believes legalising cannabis was a step too far for people. A Catholic Church spokesperson on ethics says New Zealand has crossed a line of no return in voting for voluntary euthanasia. Preliminary results for the other referendum show 65% support for the End of Life Choice Act. John Kleinsman says the legislation is broader in scope and weaker in safeguards than other laws overseas, and some vulnerable people and their carers may feel pressure to make the choice. However, the head of a group in favour of voluntary euthanasia says they're extremely glad about the result and proud to be part of history in the making. Libby Smales of Yes for Compassion says it's been a very tough campaign, but she has faith that voters have made objective decisions.
We've been trying to stay clear, stay true, give accurate data, and then allow Kiwis to make up their own good minds. And I think they have. And that, for me, feels very satisfying.
Libby Smales says people who are dying must have the right to be released from unbearable suffering. Ports of Auckland says the government has not been learning fast enough from mistakes at the border that brought COVID-19 into the community. The government announced today that all changeover crew coming into the country will now be tested for the virus. A Ports spokesperson, Matt Ball, says the case of the engineer who tested positive after working on the Sofrana Seville, a ship that had new crew from overseas on board, is a prime example of why isolation is needed.
We can't guarantee that won't happen again. What we are suggesting, what we are now mandating, will prevent that happening.
Ports of Auckland requires all crew transferring through Auckland to complete 14 days managed isolation. Japan has eased travel curbs for New Zealand, Australia and 7 other countries as Tokyo steps up efforts to revive its economy. The infection risk advisory level has also been lowered for travellers from China, Thailand, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Brunei and Vietnam, though people are still being told to avoid non-essential trips. Motorists in Auckland are being asked to avoid the southwestern motorway, where a truck and trailer unit caught fire this afternoon. Fire and Emergency says the fire, which was reported at 3 o'clock, was extinguished just after 4 and is not being treated as suspicious. It says there was no one in the stationary truck and no injury has been reported. Northbound lanes are gradually being reopened. It's 4 minutes past 6. The Silver Ferns expect the England Roses to be even better in tonight's second netball test in Hamilton. Despite being without some leading players, the Roses kept pace with the Ferns for most of the first test, which New Zealand eventually won by 13 goals. Ferns assistant coach Deb Fuller says England have the talent on and off the court to keep pushing her side.
When you look through the English playing group and you look through their coaching ranks, they've got great strategic nous and how they're going to do that. We are expecting that. It was an arm wrestle.
Deb Fuller. All Blacks captain Sam Cane is looking forward to seeing what Hoskin Sotutu can do in his first test to start. Sotutu will wear the number 8 jersey in tomorrow night's third Bledisloe Cup test in Sydney in the absence of Ardie Savea. Cane says the young Aucklander has really impressed him.
The conversations and rugby chats that we've had, I think he's a very intelligent rugby player and he's someone who sees the game really well. Look, his stints that he's had off the bench, his work rate's been massive. I think he's made a huge amount of tackles in that time and sort of found his feet in the first couple of games. He's fitted in quite seamlessly.
Sam Cane. And Black Caps all-rounder Daryl Mitchell has scored his maiden first-class century for Canterbury on day 3 of the Plunket Shield cricket match against Wellington in Christchurch. He was dismissed 103 after a 154-run 6th wicket partnership with Cam Fletcher, who finished unbeaten on 100. That's the news. Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Do we become totally and absolutely dependent for our lifelines on foreign carriers?
Lately with me, Susanna Leia-Tawa is your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Regardless whether you're in the house or not, I will continue to work hard and fight for our people.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Susanna Leia-Tawa, this week from 10 on RNZ National. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Mostly cloudy with a few showers, some heavy. Possible thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening. Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, also Gisborne through to Wairarapa. Often cloudy with isolated showers, mainly in the afternoon and evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy. Occasional rain tomorrow, more persistent in the afternoon and evening. Nelson and Marlborough, mostly cloudy with a few showers in Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds tonight. Rain for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy. Patchy rain in Otago and Southland tonight. Scattered showers spreading north tomorrow, some heavy with possible thunderstorms in Canterbury. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland rain with heavy falls spreading north tonight and tomorrow, easing to showers from the south tomorrow. Chatham Islands mostly cloudy, rain late tomorrow. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government has announced all changeover crew for ships who fly into New Zealand will now be tested for COVID-19, but there's no timeline for implementing it. At the moment, crew can fly in and join their ship without having to be tested. Ports of Auckland has introduced its own rules because it says the government isn't doing enough and says it's unsatisfied with the changes. Sally Murphy reports.
Crew who arrive in New Zealand to relieve workers on ships are currently not required to do 14 days in isolation and are only tested for COVID-19 if they have to spend at least 3 days in managed isolation while waiting to board their ships. But today, Health Minister Chris Hipkins announced from next week all crew in isolation for at least 24 hours will be tested. Mr Hipkins says logistics are still being worked out for crew who are in the country for less than 24 hours.
If they do subsequently test positive, we will be able to do a contact tracing exercise for the very limited number of people that they may have come into contact with in New Zealand, including those who are involved in the transfer, and it'll also help us with our case investigation around potential transmission on flights in and out of New Zealand as well.
The change comes after a marine engineer and 2 colleagues tested positive for COVID-19. The 3 cases worked on the Safrana Seville, while it was docked in Auckland after 8 crew flew in from the Philippines. Mr Hipkins says he's confident enough is being done to protect another COVID-19 outbreak at the border.
We're always looking at the gaps, but the basic rule is everybody coming into the country goes through our managed isolation facilities unless there is an exemption. And so we do have exemptions for it's transferring maritime workers, and this is strengthening that exemption process a little bit. So I'm confident that we've picked everybody up.
Auckland and Tauranga ports have implemented their own rules for crew, saying they must complete the 14 days and return a negative test. They want the government to make that a mandatory requirement for all crews. But Chris Hipkins says he doesn't see the point of changeover crew isolating.
The measures that the Port of Auckland have put in place, though, won't really increase that protection at all, bearing in mind that the majority of people on the ships are people who were on the ship when it arrived, rather than people who are transferring to and from the ship.
Ports of Auckland spokesman Matt Bull says if just testing people on arrival worked, we wouldn't need managed isolation for anyone.
We think it's necessary to isolate crew because if they're just tested when they arrive, they could be carrying the virus but not showing positive yet. They could then take that onto a ship, interact with possibly our staff or other people who are servicing the ships, and then you've got an entry point into New Zealand.
Mr Bull says what happened on the Safrana Seville is a prime example why isolation is needed for all changeover crew.
As the crew went aboard and New Zealand people went on board and fixed things while that overseas crew that had newly arrived was on board and passed on the infection. We can't guarantee that won't happen again. What we are suggesting, what we are now mandating, will prevent that happening.
Matt Bull says workers at the ports of Auckland feel safer going to work, knowing they won't be mingling with international crew who have not been tested. And he rejects the government's suggestion that ships will stop coming here if crews have to isolate, with most shipping agents not deterred by the requirement. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Preliminary results of the 2 referendums show 65% support for voluntary euthanasia under the End of Life Choice Act, while a majority of 53% don't support recreational cannabis. RNZ interns Alice Stewart and Nadia Amaral hit the streets to ask Aucklanders how they voted and what they think of the results.
I voted against cannabis, and I voted for having the right to end your life, so I'm pretty pleased with the results actually.
Why did you vote against cannabis?
If you legalise it, people are going to be doing it everywhere. It is still a drug, and it is harmful. So, probably not as harmful as other drugs are, but for me, I think just drugs is a big no.
I'm really happy with the end of life decision. The other one was really fussed either way.
Why did you want to see the end of life bill go through?
For the reason everyone else does. I've seen people suffer where they shouldn't.
And why don't you care about the cannabis one?
I don't smoke it.
I think the end of life choice was a good move, and I'm probably a little bit disappointed about the marijuana referendum. Not that it personally involves me, but I think it would have helped a lot of people out, because there's a lot of people who basically getting shafted for life and getting in strife for having possibly 1 or 2 marijuana cigarettes on them or what have you. So I think it just would have helped the criminal justice system.
Honestly, I think the end of life choice going through right now, there's a lot of loopholes in it right now, but I think having it, first means that we can continuously work on it so that we can get to a place where people who do want to end their life can go through, the mentoring and stuff that they need without these loopholes. With the cannabis one, I've been very on and off about it. I've always had a no opinion and I've had a yes opinion as well. there's good things and bad things about it. I think it would have been, especially in like New Zealand's economy right now, I think cannabis like being sold would be great for the economy. Everyone's done it, probably.
I voted for cannabis reform.
And why did you do that?
Because it would take power away from the police.
What did you vote on the end of life?
Yes.
Yeah, and why did you vote yes?
It's a fair choice for people to have, to make.
And Kiwis have lost $23 million to scams in the last 18 months, with the majority of victims staying silent about being duped. On top of that, 70% of small businesses are being conned out of hundreds of thousands of dollars with fake invoices and other halves. And it seems romance scams can break the heart as well as the bank. So how do you avoid them? BNZ's head of financial crime, Ashley Kaifong, says swindles are seriously big business.
We've seen cases where people have lost thousands, they've lost their life savings to these scammers, and it's really, really heartbreaking.
So what are the most common kinds of scams that you're seeing?
The most common one we see is a remote access scam. So basically what the scammer will do is ring their victim, say that there might be something wrong, that they're from their telecommunications company, that there might be something wrong with their internet. Or they might say they're from the victim's bank or their credit card company, saying that there's something wrong with a payment. Then they'll get the victims to download remote access software. There are a number of them out there. Ones that spring to mind at the moment are AnyDesk and TeamViewer, but they're not the only ones. There's a whole suite of them, and what that does is give the scammer access into the victim's computer or their mobile phone.
So what happens from that point, Ashley? Are they then sort of delving into your bank account and skimming off money?
Yeah, so what the scammer will then tell the victim is that in order to just test the system, they will need to log into their internet banking, and then unfortunately, the victims are giving away all of their banking credentials to the scammer. And at that stage, what people should be asking themselves is, for example, if it's from a telecommunications company, why would they need to know my bank account details?
So you are the bank's head of financial crime. I'm wondering how much of the crime that you're looking at are these kinds of scams. Would it be half of what you're seeing or more?
Significantly more. So we're probably looking at the work that my guys do. Approximately 70 to 80% of the investigations work relates to some type of scam.
Wow, that seems really high. So obviously there are a lot of people who are falling victim here, but I notice from your material that only, 61% of people are not reporting it. What's the problem here?
The problem is the victims feel embarrassed a lot of the time, and they're embarrassed because they think that they've fallen for a scam which they shouldn't have. The reality is that these scammers are excellent at socially engineering their victims and allowing them to kind of do things and lead them down the path that they need to. And what we really want to do is get that embarrassment factor out and actually say to people who have been approached or have actually become victims and have given away money or have lost money to it is, first of all, if you've lost money, get in touch with your bank as soon as possible.
How do you protect relatives who may fall victim to this?
Romance scams are probably one of the most heartbreaking scams that we see. What tends to happen is that people might be lonely, so they go to dating sites and look for their ideal friend or hopefully their new soulmate. It's about people being lonely. So if you've got a relative who has been widowed or is looking for a companion, etc., the best thing that you can do as a family member is actually go and talk to them and keep in constant contact, whether that be on the phone, whether that be visit them every so often, because it's that companionship that unfortunately these victims are looking for, where you can probably fill that gap by doing that. And then it's about talking about what's occurring.
So, Ashley, the one big thing is if you think you have been duped, speak up, get some help.
Yep, totally. If the one message that I could leave the listeners with is anything, it's don't be embarrassed, speak up, and hopefully do it quickly. And if you've lost any money, we might be able to get it back for you. Or if you're not don't want to talk to your bank, then actually there are other people such as NetSafe, the police, CertainZ that they can contact as well.
And that's BNZ's Head of Financial Crime, Ashley Kaifong. It is 19 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Lake Oho residents believe they've been unnecessarily delayed from moving back into the village due to demolition problems. Roughly half the properties in the village were destroyed or damaged when a fire ripped through earlier this month. The Waitaki District Council told residents yesterday if it's safe, some will be allowed to move back into habitable properties next month. Tess Brunton has more.
Dave Honeyfield was meant to retire at Lake Oho. Instead, the long-term holiday home owner was left sifting through the ash of an apartment, a sleep-out and 2 houses, one built less than 2 years ago. He couldn't recognise anything until he spotted a DVD amongst the rubble. It was from his father's funeral.
Well, I wiped it down, this DVD. It's been through a massive fire, wiped it down, put it on when I got home, and it worked perfectly. There you go. That was the only thing I found.
On Wednesday, Mr. Honeyfield's insurer told him he could get his own demolition quote weeks after the fire.
As far as I'm concerned, I want the cheapest quote out because it's just going to cost me. Basically, all I want to do is get the stuff taken away safely and put it in the right place. So I went and got my own quote. Well, 3 weeks ago, I could have had a quote and I could have been negotiating with the local guys.
He just wants to get the site cleared so he can work out his next step.
When you build a house and you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars like I have, and it's going to cost me a little bit of money, 10 grand one site and 5 grand the other site plus GST, it's not too bad to do that, get the demolition done, but it's been going on for so long. You have what you call loss assessors. They've basically admitted that it was better to go and do it yourself anyway.
The barn, a Killen B&B co-owner, Hugh Spears, says several residents aired concerns about the demolition during a Zoom meeting with the local council yesterday. He's wondering if residents could have moved back in earlier than the 9th of November.
There is still a lot of debris in the village that we've only just come to light now that some of the insurances companies are making it the landowner's responsibility to clear the debris. It must be very, very frustrating for those permanent residents that the houses haven't been affected, but they can't move into the village because of this hold-up.
His insurance company organised for his property to be completely cleared.
Could you imagine the frustration if you've got a holiday house here at Lake Oho and you're planning to come down and sort it out at Christmas time? Well, that's just a bit of a no-go, really, because you can't have this half-burnt house and with irons all flapping around in the breeze and ash and charred remains. It's not really good.
Before the debris was cleared, he and his partner returned with sieves and shovels to comb through the remains for any belongings.
The heat was so intense, it's just nothing. Broken plates, a few recognisable trinkets, but everything's chipped, broken, burnt. That was a really hard day. But these boys have come along now and they left us time, healing time, and they've come along and swept it all up and taken the debris away. And now we've got a clean palette, which is we're quite excited about.
He hopes to speak with their project managers next week, but they plan to return to the village when they can. The Waitaki District Council held an information session this afternoon for residents, with input from Environment Canterbury and the Insurance Council. For Recovery Manager Lachelle Guyon, the meeting was an opportunity to clear the air and answer questions.
So that people understood the insurance process and understood why we need to be careful when we're taking materials away from site, and for them to understand what they can and can't do in relation to their own insurance.
8 properties have been demolished so far. 6 are in progress, with a large number expected to be cleared in the coming weeks. Insurance Council Insurance Manager John Lucas says insurers are happy for residents to get their own quotes, but it can be easier for them to do it.
Most people want the insurer to manage their claim from start to finish, because it is a pretty stressful thing. It's like building a house, but you're dealing with more than that. You're dealing with requirements set down by environment standards for demolition and safe disposal of waste products.
Some Lake Oho residents are expected to be back in their undamaged homes in less than 2 weeks. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
News, Porirua is now the most expensive region in the country to rent, comes as no surprise to locals struggling to find somewhere to live. Median rents in the region hit a record $625 per week in September, up 25% on the same time last year, according to the latest Trade Me Rental Price Index. Ruth Hill reports.
Porirua resident Kit Bennett has been on the waiting list for a state house for 3 years and is assessed as being in serious need. The grandmother of 7, who works as a caregiver, has moved around boarding houses, a rest home and motels, some of which she describes as seriously squalid.
You know, like I've just been out of 2 motel units and it's full of emergency housing people. Families, young families with children, older people, older than me, you know, also in emergency housing, living in motels, living in emergency transitional housing. You know, I just feel for everyone. We should not be going through this.
The median rental in Porirua is now $625 per week, surpassing Wellington's median rental of $600 a week. Nationally, rents have risen 3% year on year. Housing advocate Jasmine Tarkink from Housing Action Porirua says rentals in the traditional working class area of Porirua East are now unaffordable for many families.
Recently we saw a 5-bedroom house in Cannons Creek for $750 a week, and we compared that to rents in Miramar and Karori and other suburbs in Wellington, and you could actually find a better house in those areas than you could in Cannons Creek.
She blames successive governments which sold off state housing to investors and is suspicious of Kainga Ora's plans for the area. Under a partnership agreement with the council and Ngāti Toa Rangatira, the State Housing Agency plans to upgrade around 2,000 state houses, build some additional public housing and build others to be sold to private buyers.
There will be 2,000 homes for purchase, a mix of supposedly affordable, which is yet to be defined, and market. So we're concerned that this is only going to get worse.
Porirua Mayor Anita Baker agrees there's still a question mark over just how affordable these houses will be, and she wants to make sure they go to Porirua people, not outsiders. She's not surprised by the Trade Me figures.
Our housing market is just flying out here, and I think we'll probably be the most expensive place to live in the region shortly. And we have so many people who cannot find homes. Obviously, we have all our motels have been purchased by MSD, so we're short for social housing, let alone just standard rental properties. And it's just becoming unaffordable for most people at the moment.
The region has some of the poorest communities in the country and some of the wealthiest. In well-heeled Whitby, fewer than 16% of residents live in rental accommodation, compared with about 63% in working-class Cannons Creek. Mrs Baker says the council's draft district plan includes more areas set aside for high-density housing, and several housing developments are going through the consent process, many of which are sold out before earthworks have begun. She says the government needs to play its part and fast-forward plans to build more social housing.
There's about 600 living in motels, and there's about another 600 on the wait list for social houses. So we're way behind, and that build process, 20 years, we need that brought forward.
On the streets of Porirua today, people couldn't believe the district is now the most expensive place in the country to rent.
Really? I don't believe it. $625 a week. Oh yeah, I believe that. My sister pays about that much, sister-in-law.
Are you renting as well?
Yeah. Thank God for Housing New Zealand.
It's disgusting. There's a lot of people that don't have jobs in Porirua. Also, with so many gang members in Porirua, So why is the rent so high?
Yeah, I was quite surprised. I mean, like, for some of the old houses that are here in Purido, there shouldn't be that much.
I think they're just artificially inflating it, and obviously what we do have here is a lot of desperate people, so maybe landlords are taking advantage of them a little bit. I know, especially around COVID, I got into housing with 1 week to spare, or I probably would have been homeless.
Meanwhile, the average asking price for houses in Porirua jumped 11% year on year in September. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
An England Roses netball superfan reckons she'll be the lone voice cheering them on as they play the Silver Ferns tonight. Ali White is at Claudelands Arena in Hamilton waiting for centre pass at 7:30. The 32-year-old moved to Hamilton from the UK in January and told sports reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe she's thrilled her home nation's playing in her new home city.
It was super exciting, especially having just moved to New Zealand, to get to watch the England Roses play in Hamilton and play 3 matches against the Silver Ferns was just awesome. I was so excited.
And you actually bumped into some of the England Roses players in Hamilton earlier this week. What are the chances? How did that happen?
So I was just out for a stroll down the high street and saw outside one of the cafes there that there were 3 England Roses that I recognised, and it was a shock and it was awesome. They were really great. They said how much they were appreciating the no COVID restrictions.
So your supporters gear unfortunately is back in the UK. Have you been able to improvise in any way?
I've managed to wear my England Roses shorts, and I've had to go with a bright orange t-shirt for today.
So you don't know of any other England netball fans coming to the game?
Not as far as I'm aware, no. So it'll be me loud and clear.
And that is the Roses superfan Ali White there. Just a bit of feedback before we head off on the referendums. This listener says, lived in Portugal for a year where all drugs were treated as a health issue, from cannabis to heroin. Never saw a junkie, never got offered as much as a joint. Drugs as such were not an issue. Someone else says, sorry to hear the euthanasia referendum result. We should have spent the money properly funding hospice care. And Peter from Korori says, good result in the drug referendum. Why would you encourage more smoking when we're still battling to reduce tobacco? Another person says, usually I'm a progressive voter, but I voted against both referendum, having seen my son's behaviour moderated by the risk of arrest. Back on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Final results of the referenda on cannabis and euthanasia are expected next Friday, following the counting of nearly 500,000 special votes. The Justice Minister says the government has no other proposals for drug law this term in the wake of a likely no vote on cannabis reform. An Environment Court ruling may see 10,000 tonnes of potentially toxic waste from the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter removed from Mataura this year. Drivers in Auckland are being asked to avoid the southwestern motorway, where a truck and trailer unit caught fire this afternoon. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights with special votes out, we've got a special Sonic Tonic. Country Life meets the airline pilots finding work during the pandemic, driving tractors. Finn Andrews from The Vale selects a mixtape, Carnivorous